What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be continuing our Covenant overview series with the Night Fae of Ardenweald. We'll be going over the Covenant signature ability, Covenant Soulbinds, the Covenant Sanctum, and all of the extra goodies you get for being a Night Fae. And now I know what you might be thinking by seeing all these trees and pretty looking stuff, that it's just gonna be full of fairies and tree people and deer people and... yeah, you'd be right. Let's dig in. So, the Night Fae serve a very special purpose in the afterlife that is the Shadowlands. They are more or less grove tenders for souls that are being fed anima so they can be reincarnated. However, with the anima droughts that the Shadowlands has been going through, this has become a lot harder for them to maintain, and the forest of Ardenweald, which they reside in, is slowly dying. You'll learn more of this as you make your way through Ardenweald in your quest to save the Shadowlands and level up and get fat loot at the same time, so I won't spoil too much for you. Either way, the Night Fae will appreciate your efforts to help them, and once you reach level 60, you'll have the opportunity to pledge your allegiance to them. You'll head to Oribos at level 60, where you'll be given the choice of one of the 4 covenants of the Shadowlands to serve. They will each show you a few examples of what sort of cool features you'll have to access if you pick them, such as an example of their unique transmog appearance, their mounts, their covenant signature and covenant class ability, and a couple other little bits of information like the capstone effect on each of the covenant soulbind character trees and their unique covenant sanctum feature. Don't worry if those last little bits didn't make any sense to you, because I'll be covering all of that in this overview, and the video is segmented out to each section that you might be interested in. So once we pick the Night Fae, we'll be sent off to the heart of the forest in Ardenweald, where we will partake in a small ceremony and earn the Soulshape Covenant signature ability. Soulshape basically works like a blink and movement speed shapeshift form. For the standard version of it, you'll turn into a Vulpin, which is a cool spectral fox thingy, and you'll blink forward 15 yards when you do so. Your movement speed will be increased by 50% while you're a Vulpin. Your Soulshape ability will also turn into the Flicker ability. Flicker has a 4-second cooldown and causes you to blink forward once again. Normally, this Soulshape ability will only last for 12 seconds, but if you're in a rested area, then it is infinite. It does have a 1.5-minute cooldown. Something that isn't obvious that I really think they should mention is if you talk to Lady Moon, this bird spirit lady thing here, she'll let you change your flicker effect to instead blink you in the direction you're moving and not just blink you facing forward. That's a pretty big quality of life change and makes it work like the shimmer ability that mages have. This same NPC will allow you to change your Soulshape form once we figure out how to unlock them. There are a lot of different animal types you can earn, like lions, stags, wolves, moths, and all sorts of other things. The only ones I've seen in games so far were a lion and some sort of a unicorn looking thing, but yeah, there are apparently a ton of choices we can unlock, so that's pretty cool. You will also gain your class-specific ability as part of the introductory quest to the Night Fae. You'll be able to use both Soulshape and your class-specific ability while leveling in the Ardenweald zone to give you time to try them out and see if you like them or not. Unlocking the class-specific ability is tied to a funny little quest chain where you act out a bunch of Azeroth's history in a play, so I won't spoil it, but it's pretty darn funny. Next, we'll go over all of the Covenant Soulbinds of the Night Fae. These are more or less just talent trees that have unique effects on them, as well as empty spaces that you can put conduits. Conduits are class and spec-specific bonuses that can benefit you in a number of ways, and will be earned from a variety of sources, like world quests, dungeons, and the PvP honor vendor. They're divided into 3 types: Potency, which increases your damage and healing throughput, Finesse, which gives you utility-oriented bonuses, and Endurance, which are for defensive improvements. Each Soulbind tree has various paths you can take, and the more renown you get, the more Soulbind traits you unlock and Soulbind conduit slots you unlock. You can essentially think of Renown as a reputation specific to your Covenant, and you increase it by doing a couple weekly quests and sections of your Covenant campaign questline. One very important thing to keep in mind ahead of time about Covenant Soulbinds is that you only start off with 1, and you unlock the other 2 by completing the various steps in your Covenant campaign questline. This questline is locked behind Renown levels as well, so it is time-gated as far as how quickly you'll earn new Soulbind characters and unlock new trait rows on your Soulbind trees. If you need a bit more information on the Renown system, I have a video I did on it a little while back that I'll link up top now. The first Soulbind we'll be going over today is Nia. Nia's capstone trait is Grove Invigoration. Basically, the way this will work is whenever you use your class-specific Night Fae ability, you'll immediately gain 12 stacks of Grove Invigoration, which is a buff that gives you 1% increased maximum health and 25 mastery for 30 seconds, so 300 mastery for 30 seconds to make it easier to look at or understand. You'll also gain stacks from healing or dealing damage, and these can overlap. So basically those 12 stacks will have a 30-second cooldown, and if you had another stack proc when that big 12 stacker was at 15 seconds remaining, you'd go to 13 stacks for 15 seconds, and then that singular stack would last for 15 seconds after the other 12 fall off. Mastery is kind of a hard stat to gauge since mastery scales differently for each spec and class in the game, but that's a really large stat proc that you can predictably get whenever you use your ability, which is pretty cool. Our first branching choice comes here, with a potency conduit to the left and an endurance conduit to the right. You'll want to make sure you know what you want out of your Soulbind tree, as for example, some classes might skip a potency slot if it means picking up a really good buff or something, so this is where a bit of planning comes into play, and that will depend on your class and spec of course. On the left side we have Run Without Tiring, which makes you regenerate 5% of your maximum health every 3 seconds while you're in your Soulshape animal form. As I mentioned before, Soulshape lasts for 12 seconds if you aren't in a rested zone, so this is basically 20% of your max health as a heal if you stay in the spirit animal form for the entire duration. I'm not quite sure if this would ever be feasible other than in like world content, or potentially this could be a strong heal while breaking away from enemies in like a PvP arena or something, I guess, I don't know. On the right side we have Stay on the Move, which would cause you to lose out on a potency conduit slot, but you'd pick up an endurance conduit slot instead. This Soulbind trait brings down the cooldown of Soulshape to 1 minute and 15 seconds baseline, and every enemy slain reduces the cooldown of it by another second. Pretty simple and probably useful for farming cloth or leather and maybe like old dungeons and raids, though I'd imagine it'd be less impactful outside of those situations. After this connecting finesse conduit, we'll have 2 more choices. On one side we have Nature's Splendor. I've mentioned these sort of Soulbind traits in my other guides, but basically this just gives you little satchels of specific goodies while you kill stuff randomly, kinda like the Legion shoulder enchants if you remember those. This one is for leather, fish, and meat, so potentially a very good moneymaker, especially early in the expansion when people are going to be trying to craft legendaries as fast as possible, or making their raid food. On the other hand, you could take Swift Patrol if you don't care about earning free stuff. This will give you a 20% movement speed for 2 minutes whenever you kill an enemy, but entering combat removes the buff. I could see this maybe being useful for mining and herbing in open world content, I guess. It does affect things like soul shape and regular movement speed, not mounted speed though, unfortunately. Nia's final row of Soulbind traits has some really interesting options in my opinion. Starting on the left, we have Nia's tools, Burrs. Your damaging attacks and spells have a chance to throw spiked burrs underneath the target. The burrs will then deal damage to the first enemy to touch them, slowing them by 20% and dealing a very impressive amount of damage over 6 seconds. This one does a lot of damage, however it doesn't work on enemies that can't be slowed, so like raid bosses, dungeon bosses, and just mobs that can't be affected by slows. When they can be affected by it though, these hit pretty hard. Next we have Nia's tools, Poison. When you successfully interrupt something, you'll apply a poison damage over time effect for 30 seconds, and anytime you re-interrupt the target with the poison on them, they'll take a nice little chunk of extra damage instantly. It also refreshes the debuff as long as you interrupt it while it's active, so this is pretty handy in world content and really good for Mythic Plus where you'll be interrupting a lot of things. By the way, both burrs and poisons won't show up if you're simming Patchwork since that doesn't work on boss targets, so you might be slightly misled if you don't realize that. They're both quite strong in dungeons, and the poison one you can pick up while still getting your second potency conduit, which is really nice. Lastly, we have Nia's tools, Herbs. Yes, herbs. And no, I don't think they're very dank. Your healing spells and abilities have a chance to give your target a 5% haste buff for 10 seconds. Having never touched a healer in my life basically, I can't say how good or bad this will be, but Wowhead's tooltip does show it have a 30% proc chance, which sounds really strong. I actually got this to proc as a rogue using Crimson Vial, which is pretty funny, but the more interesting thing is that it seems to have a chance to proc off of each tick of a heal over time, as I had it proc right as Crimson Vial was finishing. Might be kinda spicy for healers with lots of heal over time effects if that's the case, because you can put 5% haste buffs on everybody very regularly. Our next Soulbind character is Dreamweaver, and no, not the song, unfortunately. His capstone trait is Pod Tender. This is basically sorta like a free cheat death ability. Basically, if you take fatal damage, you'll instead be sucked into a seed pod thingy and regen 30% of your health over 10 seconds. However, if your seed pod takes sufficient damage, you'll die. This has a 10-minute cooldown and honestly sounds really impractical in PvP, but could prove useful in PvE content if for some reason you get owned by a bad overlap of mechanics or something. Our next group of choices is 3 very different effects. On the left, we have Soothing Voice. This will cause any target that you use a root, stun, or incapacitating effect on to have their movement speed reduced by 90%, which quickly decays over 2 seconds. This works even if they dispel the effect, which would be quite powerful in PvP. In Mythic Plus, I could see this being nice for necrotic weeks, but absolutely horrible on sanguine weeks, so that's something to consider. However, this is also where the second potency conduit slot is on this tree, so that's kind of an issue. Next, we have Social Butterfly. When at least 2 allies are within 8 yards of you, you gain a 3% burst buff for 5 seconds. After that buff falls off, 2 nearby allies gain a 1% burst buff for 5 seconds, before you get your 3% back, and the cycle keeps going like that. Pretty easy to have uptime of this in a dungeon or a raid, of course, though it's not exactly a huge burst buff, so a potency conduit slot will most likely be a better throughput gain in basically all cases. Next is Empowered Chrysalis. 10% of your overhealing received or done remains as a shield on the target for up to 10% of whomever did the healing's health, and it lasts for 5 seconds. This is not exactly an amazing sounding defensive bonus since it's such a short duration, so I'm not quite sure how valuable this option would be. Fairy Dust is a nice, free slow fall effect if you fall more than 20 yards, and this can occur once a minute. Next is Somnambulist, and yes, I totally had to look that up to pronounce it because that is a really weird looking word. This gives you a 30-minute duration, 20% increased movement speed buff if you are in a rested area for 1 minute. This is again only for movement speed, not mounted speed, but could prove useful for running old dungeons and raids where you can't mount. I need to test this part to confirm, but the Volpera Make Camp technically is a rested area, so you should get the movement speed buff even if you're out in the open world or anywhere you want if you're a Volpera, which is kinda cool. Lastly, in Dreamweaver's tree is Field of Blossoms. Using your class-specific Covenant ability will cause flowers to bloom at your feet for exactly 22.5 seconds, because how dare you think they'd round up or down, it's 22.5. While near these flowers, you'll gain a nice 12% haste buff. This of course can be exceptionally potent if you're able to stand still for the entire duration, but 22.5 seconds is a very, very long time in any content, but especially in Mythic Plus. In a raid, you might be able to turret fire for that long as a caster, but as a melee, it's not quite as likely. Our last Soulbind is Korayn, and she has a couple potentially strong traits on her tree, starting with Wild Hunt Tactics. Damage done to targets above 75% health, or healing targets below 35% health, is increased by 10%. When your damage or healing abilities are affected by this, you gain a 15% movement speed buff for 5 seconds. For Mythic Plus DPSers, this is a pretty darn potent trait, since we'll be triggering this very often, like literally on every pack we pull. For healers, this gives a little extra healing throughput when someone is dipping down, so that's pretty solid in basically any situation. The movement speed is kind of forgettable in my opinion, since it's unlikely you'll kill these things within 5 seconds to make good use of it, but it might help for dealing with some Mythic Plus affixes while you're fighting them, I suppose. To the left, we have Horn of the Wild Hunt. While you're in soul-shaped form, you increase the movement speed of all allies within 40 yards by 10%. This might help a tiny bit in raids when you have to move numerous people at once, as it's kinda like a mini stampeding roar effect I guess, but it's only 10%, that's not a whole lot. On the opposite path, you can take Wild Hunt's Charge. While out of combat, your Soul Shape's Blink effect becomes a charge which will stun your target for 5 seconds and end your Soul Shape form immediately. Not quite sure of optimal use for this other than world content stuff, maybe a small bit of usage in Mythic Plus or something, or maybe PvP if you can get out of combat for long enough to make it work, I guess, I don't know. And next we have the most overly specific Soulbind trait in the game, Vorkai Sharpening Techniques. Your weapon no longer takes durability loss. Oh boy. I'm glad I just get to keep just my weapon. I'll be completely butt naked, except for I'll have my swords. That's fine. Or you can take Get in Formation, which is infinitely better in my opinion. It increases your mount speed by 5%, and allies within 40 yards behind you also get this buff too. Kind of an obvious winner between these two in my opinion at least. In our final Soulbind trait row, we have Face Your Foes. This causes enemies to deal 3% less damage to you for 2 seconds whenever you are in front of them and cast an ability or spell. Sounds like it might be quite strong as a tank or a PvPer since it's already on the same path as the second potency conduit anyway, so that's cool. Or you can take First Strike, which is an exceptionally strong trait for Mythic Plus. Damaging an enemy before they damage you increases your critical strike chance by 25% for 5 seconds. Yeah, that's insane in Mythic Plus, especially when paired with the Wild Hunt Tactics trait at the beginning of the tree, so we'll be 25% more likely to crit and deal 10% more damage every time we pull a trash pack. I wouldn't be surprised if this one gets tuned down a little bit, but maybe not, because this is literally the last Soulbind row on the last Soulbind character, so you're gonna have to be all the way done with your Renown basically to unlock it, so maybe they won't, I don't know. Lastly, we have Hold the Line. After standing still for 5 seconds, you take 15% less physical damage until you move. I don't know how much damage raid bosses or whatever deal in physical, but I can imagine this trait being exceptional in some tanking situations. Okay, so now we'll go over the Covenant Sanctum's benefits. Each Sanctum has 3 virtually identical perks and 1 unique one. Every Covenant has a transportation system that allows members of that Covenant to move around their specific zone. So in our case, that would be the Night Fae of Ardenweald. You can unlock numerous portals that will work as fast travel around the zone, which can help when you're doing world quests or farming materials, which is pretty big. You'll also have access to the Anima Conductor. Anima is a new currency you'll be collecting from various sources throughout the Shadowlands, as it's literally what makes the Shadowlands work. The Anima Conductor lets you focus some of that anima you've been collecting into a specific event of your choosing on the map, such as unlocking new world quests that offer better rewards, or fighting unique rares, or even treasure options. Eventually, once you've done this enough times, you'll be able to permanently channel anima to each of these zones, so eventually you'll have everything unlocked for extra rewards. There's also the command table, which is basically the follower missions that we've had in the game for like the last 6 or 8 years or whatever. They've been updated though, and they're slightly more RPG and strategy oriented, but they're a little bit more complicated to look at. It gives you a decent tutorial when you first see it, because you have to actually position your companions and your troops in the right position for them to hit the right people and do their job well. These missions offer the same types of things we're used to, like anima, reputation tokens, and gold, rewards like that. For the special Covenant feature of the Night Fae, we have the Queen's Conservatory. This draws a lot of parallels to the farm you might remember in Half Hill if you played in Mists of Pandaria. Basically, you'll get special quests that reward spirits. These spirits are then to be placed in one of the wild seed pods around the conservatory, and after a few days pass, depending on the quality of the soul, it'll pop out a brand spanking new shiny soul. This soul will of course appreciate your hospitality, but will still leave you a 4-star review on Yelp for whatever reason. However, they are nice enough to leave you a nice reward chest for your time and effort. This chest will have a goodie bag in it, and the quality of the bag will vary based on the soul you cultivated and the catalysts you used on it. Catalysts are basically a way to bump up the quantity and quality of items you receive from your reward chest. You'll unlock access to catalysts and more wild seed pods as you improve the conservatory, but back onto those goodie bags. They'll often contain lots of crafting materials like ore, herbs, leather, cloth, but they can also contain BOE items, pets, and mounts as well. This is probably the most lucrative Covenant system feature, which is pretty important to keep in mind if you like easy passive income. Outside of the mounts and cosmetic goodies you earn from the Queen's Conservatory, your Covenant will also have a slew of other cosmetic goodies waiting for you as well. There are tons of cool things that await you as you increase your Renown level. Weapon appearances, armor sets, mounts, toys, battle pets, titles, and more await you as you rise up through the ranks of the Night Fae. There is a ton of stuff you'll be able to earn from your Covenant, and it'll also affect things like your PvP item rewards, your world quest rewards, your Soulbinds, so instead of making this part even longer than this whole video put together, because it seriously would be, I'll just refer you folks to a Wowhead link covering all of the Night Fae's Renown goodies that you'll earn in the comment below. Trust me, you'll want to take a look, there's a lot of stuff. And there you have it, folks. All of the game systems and unique features for joining the Night Fae of Ardenweald. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if so, any likes, comments, or new subscribers are all fantastic ways of showing your support for the channel. If you're new around to my little corner of the YouTube algorithm, then I'd like to welcome you to come check out the rest of the channel. I do new uploads every weekday on a variety of content, ranging from things like guides, overviews, tutorials, add-on stuff, weak aura stuff, and of course rogue-specific stuff. I'd also like to take this time to thank all of my regular viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.